Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Transformation. Today's episode will be about challenging the status quo, not only of your mind and what you think, but also of the systems that you live and work in. I'm delighted to welcome today's guest, Meggi Rombach, CEO of Coach Connect Consult, and also a fellow podcast host. Meggi, welcome to the show.
Hi, Susie. It's so great to be here today.
It's great to have you on the show, Meggi. Um, you've got over 20 years of experience across global brands, humanitarian organizations such as Procter& Gamble, UNICEF, and the International Red Cross. And I know you've shaped brand strategy, built global partnerships, led leadership development, but also developed people. And today, you help people design work and lives that actually fit them. And I just want to stop there because I think that's the most interesting and topical subject today in a world of AI and digital noise is finding the model that works for you and cutting through the chaos and understanding your purpose, why you do what you do and what it means. So we're going to be looking at purpose and identity and leading across boundaries and what Meggie calls mindful rebellion. So hold that thought. Coming back to purpose and mission-driven organizations, Meggie, you spent 13 years at the Red Cross. So an organization devoted to compassion and service, and not without its emotional tension, I would imagine, given what it does as an organization. But before the show, we were chatting, and you were describing a paradox where the internal culture could also be surprisingly harsh.
Mm.
So I wanted to start there with that paradox of your organizational identity and your personal identity. And can you walk us through what happens psychologically when your organizational identity becomes so merged with your personal identity and what that means in a culture that can be actually quite harsh?
Sure. So yes, I mean the Red Cross, it's an amazing family. And as
Mm.
every family, it's like often, isn't it, that with the people we love most, sometimes that's where we show our full selves. And maybe we also feel the safety to let out the not so nice sides of ourselves.
Totally. Mm.
So I experienced that a little bit with the Red Cross because also now that I left it, and it
Mm.
was a iterate process of leaving because I left and I came back part-time, then I re-left. But what I also felt in the leaving process, it is really a family. So
Mm.
I know it'll be always part of my heart.
Mm.
But to come to that this dilemma, if you will, or this contradiction. So what I noticed over the years, and I mean, I haven't been to the field much with the Red Cross, and I worked for the ICRC, which is really the part of the Red Cross that goes
Mm.
to conflict places. So
Mm.
these are really harsh environments. And people are so determined to serve the people we serve
Mm.
and put themselves second and all of that in really harsh and sometimes dangerous environments that of course builds up a lot of tension,
Of course.
and somewhere you have to let that out.
Mm.
So what we did notice that sometimes people can be harsh at each other internally.
Mm.
One of the hypotheses we developed, that's simply because we're all human beings, so
Totally.
somewhere you have to release, and as
Mm.
said, in the safe family environment, that's where you maybe allow yourself to let it out.
Mm.
But now, seeing my gradual departure and seeing I mean, people are just so amazing. And as I said, it's a family.
Mm.
So despite of those moments where things might be tense and people might be sometimes maybe unfiltered with each other, when it really comes to harsh moments, either in the field or sad moments when I left, but also many other colleagues had to leave, then you really appreciate all the positive sides and the
Mm.
amazingness of the people, what is really the fabric that holds us together.
Yeah, and I think, it's a human need, isn't it? The basic human need, particularly when we're stressed or in fight or flight, is to belong. And so, of course, that family analogy is really important. And I think, you know, the safer the space in your familial area, the more you can address tension and the more you can allow yourself to be yourself, can't you? Of course. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think that's different in a corporate environment, although there is still an element of that because we're still humans, but it's less talked about, it's less obvious. But what were the signs for you, Meggie, that you were too attached as to your organizational identity? What did that cost you? How did it play out?
I actually don't think that for me it was the close attachment to the identity, because I've been in the private sector before.
Mm.
So for me, it was a whole process of feeling that sense of belonging, because I felt like I came in as this weird external person on top, coming from a big corporate, which was not necessarily that much like favored, if you will. So I actually went through a long leadership coaching program where I gradually learned to feel confident to belong. But I think because it was so hard for me to feel that belonging, I didn't get as attached to that identity. But what really got me to the point where I was shaken up and I was like, okay, enough is enough. It had more to do with my own mindset, my maybe a big need for external validation. Also, I think my self-confidence really got a hit. And then you just start seeing how people treat you unfairly, which now I have the distance of maybe, because I got very close to a burnout end of 2023, or maybe even had one. Now I have the distance looking back, and I see also how worked up I was. And once you're in this where you're really stuck, it's really hard to dig yourself out. But I do see that a lot with colleagues, this whole sense of identity. Because if you've been in the field, particularly for 20, 30 years, and then you're either asked to leave or you choose to leave, then suddenly that identity is ripped off you. And then you're like, okay, so now that part of my identity is gone. So who am I? And that's actually a really difficult process to go through.
And it sort of creeps up on you, doesn't it? And it reminds me of like the second guessing discussion. So, it almost feels backwards. You've got a lot of experience, and then that should create more confidence, but it doesn't. And I find, as you progress in your career, you can second guess your decisions more so than you did when you were younger. Is that because you're wiser? Is that because you have more muscles to challenge the status quo? What do you think is actually happening there? And how does that play out with the younger generation? Because they seem to be going fast while you're questioning everything. But they may be looking at you and thinking, how can I have that much experience? And, I often wonder in that relationship what's happening in their heads, because often in our heads we're still questioning ourselves. Where on a piece of paper, Meggie, we've got 30 years experience, we know what we're doing, we've not seen it all, but we've seen enough to be able to have some type of discernment.
So let me chuck that into two parts of the question, because one is our own evolution and then the younger generation. So I think on our own evolution, and as you know, I also have a podcast that was called Leadership Insights, and now I reframed it to Play by Your Rules. But at the beginning, I talked to a lot of leaders, and I still do, but in a slightly different angle. So what I noticed is that almost everybody goes through certain phases of reinvention, some more radical than others. Some people just evolve and climb the ladder. Other people completely reinvent themselves, but there is this evolution. And I feel it's almost by decades, plus minus. We change, our priorities change, and then also our work changes. So I think just to normalize that and to acknowledge that, because, for me, joining the Red Cross 13 years ago, coming from the private sector, that was my dream come true. But also now leaving, or like left it recently, that's also okay, because my priorities and my life stage has changed. So I think just already normalizing that and acknowledging that, I think that helps, because I don't take away, I'm just grateful for whatever bit I lived. And I'm even grateful for the difficult moments I lived, because they made me who I am today. That gets me to the younger generation. And I was thinking about that lately, because I've become really active on LinkedIn. I'm exploring how to use LinkedIn, and I'm following some of the younger influencers just to see, what I can learn from the younger generation. But then one thing really struck me, because I spotted one or two, apparently really bright minds, top universities, had some first job experience, and then their mid-20s, they go like, now I go full on influencer. And they seem to have a huge success. But then I felt like, okay, but there is still this notion that you have to get some experience other than just talking about experience. And maybe this is me, the old school that goes like, yeah, well, you have to get your hands dirty first. So maybe the new generation doesn't. I don't know. But it just struck me that yes, you can, to talk about things, it's more powerful to talk about it from a place of lived experiences and lived pain. And if you haven't gone through that, there might be a point where it becomes really
Mm.
superficial.
And that's a huge gap, isn't it? That's growing, I feel, between the generations, and LinkedIn is not helping.
Mm.
LinkedIn has changed massively recently. And I think the new sort of younger generation content creation is not landing with what we're used to, which is exactly what you've just described. And I'm not making a judgment on that, whether that's right or wrong. I just think that gap is widening. And the younger generation do have a very different view on how they can do what they do, and they do it in a completely different way, which makes me think around skills, Meggie, and transferable skills and upskilling. Like you say, reinvention is now our normal, our new normal in inverted commas, reinventing ourselves as well because everything is moving so quickly. And you went from Procter and Gamble, so corporate, to UNICEF, to ICRC, to independent consulting. That's not just changing jobs, that's learning completely different professional languages, if you like. So, what actually transfers across sectors vs what has to be completely reinvented. I think it's a really important discussion today because we don't know what jobs are going to look like in 5 years' time, and skills neither. So what
So
was your experience of that?
So I think there is something around skills, and I call it superpowers and the
Mm,
magic mix. So I think it's something about hard skills and soft skills. It's about the stuff you can do, and you need a certain craftsmanship.
mm,
Like analytical skills or strategy. Like something is really more like what you do, and
mm,
there are many transferable skills around project management, communication, strategy. And many different levels. You can look at many. But then also, what are the soft skills? If you're like really empathetic, if
mm,
people piece person, and even what you do in your private life. So I've been training now for a few years, of course, around transferable skills. When I always encourage people is to look at the whole life,
mm,
because maybe you don't have a project management qualification, but you have a family of five. So I'm pretty sure you have pretty good project
yeah.
management skills.
Mm,
So look at all of that. And then when you find this unique combination, that's where you have your magic mix. And that's also with all those changes throughout your life. That's sometimes where the weird random things like your hobby or
mm,
the things where you think like that's not really useless for my career, that might be just the exact thing that makes you stand out against the
mm,
competition. Because
mm.
it's really this whole mix when we feel the whole self, when we bring the whole self to the table.
Mm, mm. And I think that that whole questioning piece is really important for self-awareness and reinvention. But how do you help someone, Maggie, distinguish between healthy self-reflection
Hmm.
and more destructive self-doubt? Because we can quite easily get into that darker
Hmm.
place of self-doubt, can't we?
Yeah, so I think, again, I think normalizing is an important part. So I've gotten really heavily into mindfulness over the last two
Mm,
years. I've come across it almost 10 years ago, and it was like this, oh, yeah, let's meditate for 10 minutes a day. And that's a nice to have that. I do that once I have the time to do it. But then, driven by my burnout, and then I also faced a more serious health challenge that really forced me to stop and reflect. And then I
mm,
really got into mindfulness seriously. I did the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. I did a specialized program on it was called Flow at Work, which really zooms in on mindfulness more for efficiency and productivity at work.
mm,
And mindfulness is not just let's go meditate. That's part of it, but it's also the whole principles around non-judgment, around
mm,
it's really around the mindset. And I think that helps a lot in that space.
mm,
Because first of all, is when we do get negative and in a victim mood, the first step is to become aware of that. And because in that whole process, there's also in the whole change management, there's this whole moment that it's important to mourn, to
mm,
go through that moment. So it's
mm,
important to acknowledge those feelings and to allow them, but not to get stuck there.
mm,
So to not get really depressed. I know like if you're really clinically depressed, you need other help,
Of
because if
course.
you're really at that point, you cannot just be positive. But let's say if you're just, frustrated, if like on a healthy level going
Mm,
through those negative emotions, first of all, lift them, allow them, let them out. Because if you keep them in, then at one point they'll explode out like a volcano.
mm,
So let them out, lift them, acknowledge them, but then let them pass. And
mm,
I felt that all those tools that mindfulness give you are extremely powerful to become aware, to be conscious, and to manage those emotions.
mm,
And then you can get more into a constructive place where you can start looking ahead, where you can look at the positive side. But to just be like artificially positive and like everything is great, I think that's actually really dangerous,
mm,
because it's not. And if we don't allow and look at the dark spots,
mm,
they'll come creeping up at us sooner or
mm,
later.
mm. And I think an understanding and mastery of that process is important for yourself. It's also important if you're working in organizations and you have teams. And I was going to say if you're going through change, but everybody is constantly going through change now and reinventing themselves, their business, the way they work, the way they think. So, and I think all my listeners will recognize this process and the energy it takes to do things differently in an organization and create momentum under the radar in inverted commas, because you have to do it like in a submarine way, don't you? So which is
Absolutely.
counterintuitive to the whole be bold, disrupt loudly, fail fast discussion and narrative that we hear everywhere. So can you explain, Meggie, how you've experienced this submarine technique and why it works?
Yeah. So I've been working for over a decade on partnerships, which
Mm,
was, at the Red Cross, the ICRC where I worked, historically it was really like we just do the work and we
mm,
do it extremely well and we do it
mm,
fast. But then there was more and more acknowledgement of, if we do it in partnerships, that can be sometimes more efficient and can actually reach more people. But
mm,
it was really a mentality thing that was against what the organization is used to do. So a lot of this was new. There were often resistance. And actually, one tool that also helped me, and I'm sure you're aware of that, it's linked to the ProSci management process, the ATCAR model,
yeah.
which kind of highlights, or ATCAR stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And it says basically, wherever you're stuck, you're stuck. And
Mm,
then, so if you want to have a change and people haven't bought into the change, even if you give them all the tools, that won't work because they haven't bought into it.
mm,
So depending on where the people sit, you have to attack there.
mm,
So the submarine mode sometimes was a way to develop a positive case study or some more evidence to then
mm,
be able to convince people. And what I call the submarine mode is sometimes, you can either push up hard and try to convince people, and either they start listening or you just run against the wall. So
mm,
what I did, I would go submarines, I would go under the radar and just do some small projects here and there. So
mm,
for instance, we built a really amazing collaboration around sports and
mm,
wheelchair basketball programs, which was really not the core work we did, but
mm,
it really helped a lot of people we served. And I just started with a small collaboration with a corporate, with actually the wheelchair basketball, no, the normal basketball federation. And, we just tested in one place. And, and once we started creating evidence, we would slowly bring it up
mm,
to higher level people as a positive case study.
mm,
I also call it like, just pilots, like the small pilots. And
mm,
it is probably linked to the thought of fail fast.
mm,
You do something small enough that the risk is not so high. And
mm,
if you fail, well, you keep in your submarine mode until you figured something out. So and then once you have something to share, then you come up with your submarine and you bring it to awareness and get some guidance, get some input, and then you go back down and keep on working on it. So that's kind
mm.
of the analogy I used.
And I think it's really useful because, when you're submerged, you're testing ideas under the radar, aren't you? And then you're sort of navigating, and that's normally building peer momentum, So going to find influencers within the organization, people who think like you, who want to do things differently, but still under the radar. And then only emerging when it's strong enough to sort of withstand resistance reminds me of a project that we did when I was working in an organization where we intentionally did that because we knew it was very different in terms of the way we wanted to work, the way, what it meant for reporting, what it meant for interactions. And so we kept it under the radar until we had something tangible as an outcome that we could then discuss in the normal way that the system discussed things. So I think that dance between using the sort of informal part of the organizational system to inform the major part of the organizational system. It's about strategic patience, really, isn't it? Something I'm not very good at, patience, but I think it's
It,
quite exciting to stay under the water, but it's also quite exciting to bring it out.
absolutely. And what I then noticed when I was sitting on one of our senior leadership teams, leadership often wants to support innovation and new ideas.
Mm,
But then often the question is, so how concretely can I help?
mm,
And I think the submarine technique helps make it, it's also managing up. It makes it
yes.
easier to leaders to say yes, because, it's rather than saying, I have an idea, I want to do this.
Mm,
You can come back and say, like, look, I tested it. This is what we learned. This is what worked. This is what we didn't work. Hence, I need your help on ABC.
mm,
And the more concrete that is, the easier it is for a leader to say yes. Because if you just come, I have an idea, I need the typical thing, I have an idea, I need budget. And and
mm,
in all organizations, and most organizations, budgets are tight, right?
mm,
So how to say sign off something that is completely vague? So by having already something tested in a smaller scale, will make it easier to then also help management to discuss something very specific
mm,
and be very clear on where they could help.
mm.
And then often management is happy to help. And then you can design the next pilot in a bigger scale. And then slowly and slowly you build it to something that is a bit more scalable.
And I think in networked organizations, of course, submarines can be seen a little bit more clearly once they're up on the surface, can't they? But I think we're back to the identity thing. There is a threat to the identity of the senior management and the way they are linked to the organizational power that is there today. And of course, this is a power shift, isn't it? And which, you were saying that only about 10% of organizational rebellion is actually mindful. So I want to come to this mindful rebellion, which I love. I just love the statement mindful rebellion. What is it, Meggie? And why is it so important that rebellion is mindful?
Hmm. So this is really like a enlightenment I had over the last year or so. And there was different elements that got me to that point. So as explained before, I got really into mindfulness.
Mm,
And then the whole last year I spent discovering my voice, finding my
mm,
voice. I worked literally with a voice coach. I went for the first time on a stage, give a keynote speak. But I knew for me that was also the analogy of
mm,
literally finding my voice and daring to speak up. And that's when I also renamed my podcast to Play It by Your Rules.
mm,
And then I already had this idea for a long time. But then, more or less at the same time, we did a personality test training at work using a methodology. It's called PCM. I
mm,
would have to look it up. I mean, it's a tool used with NASA astronauts,
mm,
and it defines the different energy types you're in. And I learned that I just moved into rebel energy. And I just loved that. And,
mm,
it also really means this whole of, work can be fun. It's also there to speak up, like this
mm,
whole energy. So I brought this energy to my podcast. But then I was thinking, Mama, I also want to work with organizations.
mm,
So if I encourage people to rebel and you're a leader and you listen to that, maybe you worry, so what happens if all my staff starts to rebel now?
mm,
So now recently I found a book that gave me that last puzzle piece that was missing. It's a book called Rebel Talent. It's
mm,
written by Francesca Gino,
mm.
and she researched why it's also important to have rebel talent. I mean, you
Mm.
need rebel leaders, but you also need rebel
Real
talent.
talent. Mm,
Because if people dare to rebel, and then again, that's why I talk about a mindful rebellion, because, we don't want to have rebels that just go into anarchy and challenge the system.
mm,
We want mindful rebels. And what I mean by that is, if you allow people to discover their voice, to claim their space, to set their boundaries, which, yes, that can be painful sometimes to manage people that say no to you as a leader. But if they have their boundaries and if they're in a safe space, they will speak up. They will raise issues when they arise. They will share their ideas. So ultimately, that will lead to more innovation, to more employee engagement, and to more, better retention. And that's also Francesca's research that she worked on. And I was like, oh my God, now I have the golden bullet. Because honestly, rebel energy, it's just good for everybody. You know, if we dare to accept who we are and to speak up authentically, mindfully, and that for me is really key. It's not, you know, it's coming from a, you know, from a mindful, from a kind place. I think that's when organizations can blossom and people can be happier in their jobs.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for somebody listening who feels frustrated with their organization's rigid system, how do they know, Meggie, if they're actually being mindfully rebellious or just frustrated and reactive?
Oh, wow. Yeah. You know, there's another concept that comes to mind that also links to that. And it's not an immediate answer, but it's also mindset. You know, this now that I'm embracing entrepreneurship, so I started reading up a lot about entrepreneurship. I realized that I was already an intrapreneur for a long time. And there's also a guy who coined that term like a decade ago. So the whole idea is you take this entrepreneurial mindset in big organizations. So, and there are always people that find loopholes. You know, I mean, when I did my MBA, we had a professor who was hugely inspiring. He was actually the deputy general secretary of UNDP, one of the big UN organizations, when the Millennium Goals were developed. And he found even loopholes in hugely bureaucratic organizations like the UN that can feel very slow. If you feel frustrated in the private sector, go to the UN. You know, it can feel extremely bureaucratic and slow. And even there, you can find loopholes and paths. So if people listening are frustrated, I mean, first of all, you know, look for the loopholes, look for the champions. And that, again, is coming from ProSci. There's an amazing exercise where you map your hierarchy or your teams and you identify the champions and the gatekeepers and also the blockers, like the people that are really not convinced. So I would always encourage people start working with the champions. If somebody's sitting on the fence and is convincible, bring them the data. If somebody is really just totally against it, that's difficult. That's a tough cookie. Because if that person is in a decision-taking position, you might just not be able to convince that person ever. So I think sometimes we also need to call a spade, you know. So if people are listening and they've tried everything and they're still stuck in their bureaucracy and nothing is moving, maybe they're just in the wrong place and they have to move.
And it reminds me of Innovisor's 3% rule, where you go and you find the informal influencers, and 3% of the organization can affect 90% of the transformation. But coming back to people's voices, how can you help people break their script and build their life differently? Because what's interesting is often when you talk to people, they're talking from a script that they wrote when they were 30 or 25, and they're
Or
now,
seven often.
or 7, yeah. And they're now like 50 or 40, or, you know, decades ahead of that script, but that script is still the script that's running them. So what does that renegotiation process look like, Meggie?
So there's a really great book. It's called Transitions by William Bridges. And what he talks about is to make a change, there are essentially three phases. You know, you have to close, you have an ending, you have to mark the ending intentionally. Then there's a neutral zone and there's a new beginning. And what we tend to do, we rush through the neutral zone because, you know, it's like messy, it's uncomfortable, we don't know where to go. So the first important thing is to allow sufficient time in the neutral zone. And there's just no way around introspection. You know, often people don't know where to go. And as you say, if we have these old scripts, is first of all, okay, let's identify those scripts. And many are coming really from early childhood, our parents, you know, a lot of our accepted beliefs, we formed them really early. So just even to uncover them is really important. And then to say, like, okay, maybe some of those beliefs are amazing. They serve us. Let's keep them. But maybe others don't serve us. So let's challenge them. So there is this whole phase where people really have to go deep. And that's actually where, having worked as an internal coach for a while and more worked with other people, I felt that having clarity, what most people lack is clarity, courage, and confidence. Not confidence as such, but confidence to change. And that's where I'm now really focusing my initial work on. I really zoom in on digging deeper there. And there are many tools to use it. I mean, there's this model that's used a lot in coaching. It's called Ikigai. It's coming from a Japanese concept, which brings together what you're good at doing, what you love doing, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. And I would encourage listeners to start there. Just do a brainstorming. Because it's not, sometimes is what you're good at doing is what you love doing. And then you're already in a good space, but not always. So let me give you one concrete example on that I discovered when I went through one of those assessment tools and coachings myself. It's a tool that now I got certified on it because I thought it's so powerful. It measures your motivation and what gives you energy. So what I learned using that tool, I mean, I'm a people person. I knew that belonging is really important to me. So that was just reconfirming something I already knew. Now, the bit that was surprising to me, but now it's obvious. One element they measure you on is structuring. So structuring is everything that's like diligent, organization. I'm German. I'm really good at that. What I learned in that process is it really gives me zero energy. I hate it. I mean, okay, maybe I don't hate it, but I don't necessarily enjoy doing that. And in some of my recent jobs, I've done a lot of that. And just getting this awareness is, yes, I'm really good at that, but only because I'm good at that doesn't mean I have to keep on doing that if I don't like it, if it doesn't give me energy. And that happens with many leaders. Many leaders have come to that place because they're extremely good at something, but it doesn't necessarily give them joy. So if listeners would like to get started, Google Ikigai, look it up. We can probably also put it in the show notes. It's a simple concept, and just start a brainstorming there and start looking. And if people find out that actually they're fully aligned with what they like doing and what they're good at doing, well, fantastic, celebrate that. But some people might find out that there's a misalignment, and then it's worthwhile to dig deeper.
And, we're having a discussion about being intensely human. What do you think AI can bring to that process, if anything? Because we're in the hype of AI, aren't we? But I do think that it can leverage certain things in the human environment. So I'd be really interested on your thoughts on what AI can bring to mindful rebellion.
I'm thinking about that a lot, and I'm exploring it a lot. And I had so I'm based in Geneva, and I had the huge opportunity to go to two events end of 2025 that I thought were really eye-opening. One was the AI for Good Summit hosted in Geneva. So there was a lot of discussion exactly about how can AI help us to augment ourselves rather than replace ourselves. And then I had the immense pleasure to go to a meeting with the founder of Mindfulness, who brought it to the large audience. He's 81 now. He's absolutely amazing. For me, what I'm clear on, but I'm not quite sure yet how it would look like. So I think mindfulness is one of the antidotes to AI. And what I mean by that is, yes, AI will help us with a lot of things. But first of all, we have to become aware where it can help and where it'll make us really stupid. And I think we're already starting a world where we become much more stupid because we just put everything into freaking ChatGPT and, we write it. And I'm just as guilty, but at least I'm mindful about it. So I try to, so we ask it a lot of things to do. And this is a real risk for the younger generation because they have this tool now. So unless you go through the difficult bits, at some point you will just simply lose certain skills because you never had to build them. So I think there's something around becoming really aware about how AI can help, but also on the risks of AI. And in parallel, I really feel passionate that we have to build all these mindfulness skills and trainings already with kids in school so that they they learn both, that they learn to be present in the present moment and leverage all the
Mm.
advantages AI can give, because else we'll be just really dull human beings in 10 years from now, and that would be a shame.
And of course, they have no pre-AI experience, do they? Like you say. But also, it isn't exercising their critical thinking muscle, it isn't exercising their imagination, it isn't exercising lots of things. So I like the idea of bringing them both in parallel. I think we're quite far from that in the education systems, but yeah, I totally
And if listeners
adhere
would
to
like
that.
to dig a bit deeper on that, there was recently a great podcast by Simon Sinek
Mm,
on that topic. And he also talks about sometimes we have to go through the pain to come up with the biggest insights. And I
yes.
listened to that podcast when I worked on a really complex project where I had to analyze 70 role descriptions, 70 different
Mm,
roles, and look how to simplify them. And I
mm.
was like, this is the age of AI. I just
Oh,
delegate that to an AI. And then I listened to his podcast. So I did delegate it to AI, which did a great analysis. But then I did spend a week or so to really dig through all the details of those 70 job descriptions.
mm,
And it really completely changed how I could then challenge AI to come to better answers.
mm,
And the whole project work I was then doing the next 3 months on that project, I was just so much better in doing that because I spent this painful time going through the details myself.
mm,
And
mm,
I think we have, and so I think going forward, we have to choose carefully what task we delegate because they're dull and it helps us a lot to just let AI do them.
mm,
But then also choose the moments where, yes, we could delegate.
mm.
But if we don't, we'll just build our knowledge and our understanding on such a higher level that it's worthwhile to go through the dull exercise of analysis ourselves.
It's what you were saying about the transformation curve, isn't it? The dark place, a lot comes out of there in terms of insights and learning. So it's the same process, isn't it? But I think it's even more important with AI because it's going to become such a massive part of the way we live, but particularly for the younger generation who are coming in, that's going to be the only way they know. So yeah, I think that's really important. Meggie, time is running, but before we go, can you therefore give our listeners a final call to action for mindful rebellion in today's world?
So, yeah, just start getting more information about mindfulness and don't think about it. This is just hippie meditation. Become curious. Get
Mm,
a book on it. If you're hooked, I mean, there's the 8-week program. This is the program that will really help you to make it a habit, but that might
mm,
be too big of a jump. But in most places, there are discovery workshops. There's maybe like a half-day workshop, maybe just even an online session. Just become curious and test it out because that's the whole thing about habits. Somebody I just came across that recently, like these micro habits.
mm,
These do something small for like 5 minutes for 3 weeks or at least a week, and just see what it does. Just
mm,
explore. Don't make it too big because it's too big.
mm,
Chances are it won't stick, but just something small and experiences, because that's the thing. As long as we stick in our heads and we just
mm,
go for the pros and cons, we might start overthinking. So don't overthink. Just pick one small thing, try it out, see if your listeners get also hooked with the mindful element of rebellion and also the rebellious side of rebellion. Like next time you're in a meeting and you have a great idea, just share it
mm,
and be this like don't be attached to whether it lands or not, but just take it as an experiment. This is an idea, let's see if it lands. If it lands, great. If it doesn't land, okay, next time I pitch another idea and see where it takes you.
mm. Thank you. I'm going to leave our listeners with that, with to be bold about experimenting with their ideas and to create micro habits of mindfulness. And also, my biggest takeaway is to constantly regenerate and reinvent your own script and don't just take it for granted, because I think that's where it starts as well, is my takeaway from our discussion, Meggie. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your insights and your stories. Where can people find out more about you, Meggie, and what you do?
So I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's probably always the latest, greatest. So find me there. And also on my website, mindsetmastery.ch. So that's probably going to go through a few upgrades, but you'll find me there. And of course, my podcast, Play It by Your Rules. Listen in and get a bit of rebel energy yourself.
Excellent. I'll put all that in the show notes so that people can go and fill their cup with rebel energy. Meggie, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.